March 27, 1941, 18:00 hours, Eastern Mediterranean. German Fliegerkorps ex-intelligence officers in their Sicily command bunker study reconnaissance photographs through magnifying glasses. The assessment travels by encrypted telegram to Rome, then Naples. British Mediterranean Fleet crippled, only HMS Valiant operational, no aircraft carriers. Admiral Angelo Iacchino aboard the Italian battleship Vittorio Veneto receives this intelligence as gospel. What the German pilots missed in their hasty flyovers would cost 2,303 Italian sailors their lives and hand Britain absolute control of the eastern Mediterranean. The German intelligence failure began 3 weeks earlier when Luftwaffe reconnaissance crews, flying at maximum altitude to avoid British fighters, misidentified ship silhouettes in Alexandria harbor. Oberleutnant Klaus Weber, peering through binoculars from his junkers Ju-88 at 25,000 feet, counted what appeared to be one operational battleship among the forest of masts and superstructures. His report, filed with mechanical precision, became the foundation for Operation Gaudo, the Italian Navy's most catastrophic sortie of the war. Weber had no way of knowing that HMS Warspite and HMS Barham lay hidden behind breakwaters, their camouflage netting and careful positioning creating the illusion of a crippled fleet. In the concrete corridors beneath Palermo, Generalmajor Maximilian von Weichs studied the intelligence summaries with growing satisfaction. The British Mediterranean fleet, once the terror of Axis shipping lanes, appeared broken beyond repair. 2 battleships allegedly damaged beyond combat capability, the aircraft carrier HMS Illustrious limping toward American shipyards for extensive repairs. Von Weichs personally telephoned Admiral Erich Raeder in Berlin. The moment has arrived. The Italians can finish what we started at Taranto. But 800 miles east in Alexandria, Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham was orchestrating one of naval history's most elaborate deceptions. HMS Warspite, his flagship, had been carefully repositioned behind a floating dry dock to mimic a ship under extensive repair. HMS Barham maintained the illusion by running only minimal electrical systems, her crew ordered to avoid any activity visible from the air. The newly arrived HMS Formidable, replacing the damaged Illustrious, remained hidden in a covered basin that German photo interpreters mistook for an empty dry dock. The deception extended beyond Alexandria harbor into the clubs and social centers where Axis spies maintained their watch. Cunningham himself played his role with theatrical precision, arriving at the Alexandria Sporting Club on the afternoon of March 27th with an overnight bag and golf clubs. Within sight of the Japanese consul, known to relay intelligence to German contacts, Cunningham spent 2 hours on the golf course, establishing his alibi for an evening of leisure. An official dinner aboard HMS Warspite was announced for that night, invitations distributed to local dignitaries. The consul's radio message to Berlin confirmed the British admiral's apparent complacency. At 21:30, under the cover of Mediterranean darkness, Cunningham slipped away from the club through a rear entrance. By 22:00, he stood on the bridge of HMS Warspite as she led the most powerful British battle squadron assembled in the Mediterranean since 1940. 3 Queen Elizabeth-class battleships, their 15-inch guns loaded and ready, steamed westward at 20 knots. HMS Formidable, her flight deck packed with Ferry Albacore torpedo bombers, maintained position in the center of the formation. The intelligence gap that would doom the Italian fleet extended far beyond ship counts. German aerial reconnaissance had failed to detect the revolutionary Type 279 radar installations aboard HMS Valiant. While Italian ships relied entirely on visual spotting, limited to perhaps 12 miles in perfect conditions, British radar operators could track surface contacts at ranges exceeding 25 miles. This technological disparity, invisible to high-altitude German cameras, would prove decisive in the darkness off Cape Matapan. Meanwhile, 1,200 miles northeast in a converted mansion outside London, 19-year-old Mavis Beatty hunched over encrypted Italian naval signals in Bletchley Park's cottage number 3. Working alongside veteran codebreaker Dilly Knox, Beatty had spent 3 days and nights unraveling the Italian Navy's Enigma machine settings. The breakthrough came with a single phrase, "Today's the day -3, by March 25th. Knox's team had reconstructed the entire operational plan for what the Italians called Operation Gaudo. The intercepted messages revealed Admiral Iachino's task force in devastating detail: the 45,000-ton battleship Vittorio Veneto with her 9 15-inch guns, 6 heavy cruisers of the Zara and Trento classes, 2 light cruisers, and 13 destroyers. Their mission: intercept British convoys supplying Greek forces, demonstrate Italian naval superiority to skeptical German allies, and restore the Regia Marina's reputation after the humiliating British air attack on Taranto. What the Italian signals also revealed, though Iachino himself seemed unaware, was the critical shortage of fuel oil that had crippled Italian naval operations. Italy's strategic reserves, totaling 18 million tons at the war's outbreak, had dwindled to less than 800,000 tons by February 1941. Mussolini's orders to stretch remaining supplies over 20 months meant every major sortie required explicit authorization from Rome. Operation Gaudo represented a desperate gamble with irreplaceable resources. The German pressure on Italy to demonstrate naval aggression had intensified following the February meeting in Murano between Admiral Arturo Riccardi and Grand Admiral Erich Raeder. The Kriegsmarine's frustration with Italian naval performance was barely concealed. German U-boats were sacrificing themselves in the Atlantic while the Italian surface fleet remained largely inactive in home ports. Raeder's message was unambiguous: prove your worth or face reduced German support for Mediterranean operations. Unknown to either German or Italian planners, their strategic communications had been thoroughly penetrated by British intelligence. Every movement order, every fuel allocation, every operational directive passed through Bletchley Park's analytical machinery. The British knew not only when Iachino would sail, but his precise route, timing, and tactical intentions. Ultra-intelligence provided Cunningham with a strategic advantage no admiral in history had possessed: complete foreknowledge of enemy plans. The Japanese naval mission in Rome, led by Admiral Katsuo Abe, observed Italian preparations with professional interest and growing concern. Vice Admiral Kichisaburo Nomura's comprehensive survey of Italian naval capabilities had identified critical weaknesses that German intelligence appeared to have overlooked. Japanese observers noted the absence of radar installations, primitive night fighting equipment, and inadequate air-sea coordination. Their reports to Tokyo, intercepted and decoded by Allied cryptographers, expressed skepticism about Italian naval effectiveness. Captain Takashi Nato, the Japanese naval attaché in Rome, filed particularly damning assessments of Italian technological capabilities. His March 15 report noted Italian fire control systems remain primitive compared to British installations. Night engagement capabilities minimal. Radar technology non-existent on operational vessels. These Japanese observations, reaching Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's headquarters via diplomatic channels, influenced Japanese naval doctrine regarding night surface actions. The technological disparity between British and Italian forces extended far beyond radar. British fire control systems, perfected during years of North Sea operations, could maintain accurate gunfire in conditions where Italian optical systems became useless. HMS Warspite's Admiralty Fire Control Table, a mechanical computer that calculated firing solutions by integrating range, bearing, and target motion, represented a generation of advancement over Italian manual plotting systems. British searchlight technology provided another decisive advantage. The Royal Navy's 24-inch carbon arc searchlights could illuminate targets at ranges exceeding 6,000 yards with sufficient intensity for accurate gunfire. Italian ships carried similar equipment but lacked the training and doctrine for coordinated night illumination. British crews had practiced night action procedures for months, while Italian training emphasized daylight fleet engagements. The ammunition disparity told an equally stark story. British 15-inch armor-piercing shells, manufactured with precisely controlled metallurgy, could penetrate 13 inches of hardened steel at combat ranges. Italian 8-inch cruiser shells, while individually effective, lacked the weight and velocity to damage British battleship armor. The mathematical reality was brutal: Italian cruisers could not sink British battleships, but British battleships could obliterate Italian cruisers with single salvos. On the morning of March 28, as Iachino's task force steamed eastward from Naples, German intelligence officers in Sicily maintained their assessment of British weakness. No additional reconnaissance flights were ordered. The Luftwaffe's attention focused on supporting Rommel's African offensive, leaving Italian naval operations with minimal air support. This strategic neglect would prove catastrophic. The first contact between opposing forces came at 0635, when Vittorio Veneto's Imam, Row 43 reconnaissance seaplane, spotted British cruisers south of Crete. Admiral Henry Pridham Whipple's force, comprising HMS Ajax, HMS Gloucester, HMS Orion, and the Australian cruiser HMAS Perth, appeared to be exactly what Italian planners had hoped to find: isolated British ships far from heavy support. At 0755, the Italian 3rd Cruiser Division under Vice Admiral Luigi Sansonetti engaged Pridham Whipple's cruisers in a running gun battle. The Italian heavy cruisers Trieste, Trento, and Bolzano, each mounting 8 8-inch guns, should have overwhelmed the British force. But Pridham Whipple executed his orders perfectly, leading the Italians eastward toward Cunningham's approaching battleships while maintaining maximum range to avoid decisive damage. The Italian gunnery performance revealed fundamental problems with their fire control systems. Despite firing over 400 rounds in the initial engagement, Sansonetti's cruisers achieved only splinter hits on HMS Gloucester. The excessive dispersion of Italian salvos, a chronic problem with their high-velocity guns, scattered shells across wide areas rather than concentrating fire on specific targets. British observers noted that Italian shooting, while accurate in range, lacked the tight patterns necessary for decisive hits. At 10:55, Vittorio Veneto joined the engagement, her massive 15-inch guns immediately finding the range to British cruisers. From a distance of 25,000 yards, the Italian battleship fired 94 rounds in 29 salvos, each capable of sinking a British cruiser with a direct hit. But the same dispersion problems that plagued Italian cruisers affected their most powerful warship. Shell splinters damaged HMS Orion, but no decisive hits were achieved before Pridham Whipple escaped under smokescreens. The failure to destroy the British cruiser force represented more than tactical disappointment. Italian naval doctrine emphasized decisive fleet actions, the swift elimination of inferior enemy forces before they could escape or receive reinforcement. Vittorio Veneto's inability to sink even one British cruiser despite overwhelming firepower superiority exposed fundamental flaws in Italian gunnery training and equipment. At 11:27, the tactical situation reversed completely when ferry albacore torpedo bombers from HMS Formidable appeared over the Italian formation. The sight of British carrier aircraft, impossible according to German intelligence assessments, stunned Italian commanders. Radio intercepts captured Admiral Iachino's incredulous message to his cruiser captains: British aircraft carrier reported operational. Previous intelligence incorrect. Maintain formation and prepare for air attack. The German intelligence failure now stood exposed in the harsh light of combat reality. Not only were 3 British battleships operational instead of 1, but a fully operational aircraft carrier was launching coordinated strikes against Italian ships. The Luftwaffe's promised air support, so confidently pledged during planning conferences, remained notably absent from Mediterranean skies. The first wave of British torpedo bombers attacked at 11:27 but failed to score hits on the fast-moving Italian ships. However, the attack achieved its secondary purpose of disrupting Italian formation and forcing Iachino to consider withdrawal. The prospect of repeated air attacks without corresponding Italian air support made continuation of the operation increasingly untenable. At 15:19, the second wave of albacore bombers achieved what surface gunfire had failed to accomplish. Lieutenant Commander John Dalyell Stead, leading his aircraft through intense Italian anti-aircraft fire, pressed his attack to point-blank range before releasing his torpedo into Vittorio Veneto's port side. The explosion flooded 4,000 tons of seawater into the battleship's hull, reducing her speed to 19 knots and forcing emergency damage control procedures. Dalyell Stead's aircraft, riddled by Italian gunfire, crashed into the Mediterranean moments after the torpedo strike. His sacrifice exemplified the aggressive British tactical doctrine that contrasted sharply with Italian defensive responses. While Italian ships maneuvered to avoid air attack, British aircrew pressed home their assaults regardless of personal risk. The torpedo hit on Vittorio Veneto represented the first time in naval history that air power had successfully attacked a modern battleship at sea while underway. The psychological impact on Italian morale was devastating. If their most powerful warship could be crippled by obsolescent biplanes, what hope existed against modern British naval aviation? Italian damage control procedures, while professionally executed, revealed another technological disadvantage. British ships carried advanced pumping systems and compartmentalization designed for battle damage. Italian designs, emphasizing speed and firepower, provided less comprehensive damage control capability. Vittorio Veneto's crew performed heroically, but their ship's vulnerability to underwater damage became painfully apparent. The Third British Air Attack at 1930 achieved even more significant results. While Vittorio Veneto escaped further damage, the heavy cruiser Pola was struck by a torpedo that destroyed her engine room and left her dead in the water. This tactical development would prove strategically decisive, as Italian naval doctrine required other ships to assist disabled vessels regardless of risk. Admiral Iachino faced an impossible decision. Standing naval orders demanded that he dispatch ships to assist Pola, but doing so would expose his remaining forces to night attack by British battleships known to be approaching. The choice between abandoning a disabled ship and risking his entire force epitomized the strategic dilemma confronting Axis naval operations. The decision to send Zara and Fiume to assist Pola would be debated in Italian naval circles for decades. Critics argued that Iachino should have abandoned one ship to save his entire cruiser division. Supporters maintained that Italian naval honor demanded assistance to disabled vessels. The debate obscured a more fundamental issue: Italian ships lacked the radar and night fighting capabilities necessary to operate safely in darkness against British forces. At 22:20, the Italian cruisers Zara and Fiume, accompanied by destroyers Alfieri and Carducci, approached the disabled Pola in complete darkness. Their crews, trained for daylight fleet actions, struggled with navigation and recognition procedures in conditions where visual identification was limited to a few hundred yards. Italian naval doctrine simply had not anticipated night surface actions against radar-equipped opponents. The three British battleships, guided by HMS Valiant's Type 279 radar, closed to 3,800 yards before Italian lookouts detected their presence. At this range, British 15-inch guns could not miss. HMS Warspite, HMS Valiant, and HMS Barham opened fire simultaneously, their muzzle flashes illuminating the dark Mediterranean like lightning strikes. The British searchlights, coordinated and precisely aimed, trapped Italian ships in cones of brilliant illumination. Midshipman Prince Philip, serving aboard HMS Valiant, operated one of the searchlights that outlined Fiume for the battleship's guns. The Italian cruisers, clearly visible against the dark water, presented perfect targets for British gunners who had trained extensively for night actions. The destruction was swift and terrible. Fiume, struck by multiple 15-inch shells, exploded in a pillar of flame visible 20 miles away. Zara, hit repeatedly below the waterline, listed heavily to port before capsizing. The destroyers Alfieri and Carducci, caught in the crossfire, were blown apart by British secondary armament. In 5 minutes of firing, the British had eliminated an entire Italian cruiser division. Italian survivors later described the night action as supernatural in its precision and devastation. Seaman Giuseppe Fermato, rescued from Zara, recalled, "The British appeared from nowhere like ghosts. Their searchlights found us instantly. There was no escape, no chance to fight back. Our guns were not even loaded for night action." The technological supremacy demonstrated by British radar extended beyond simple target detection. HMS Valiant's operators could track multiple targets simultaneously, providing firing solutions that allowed the three battleships to concentrate their fire for maximum effect. Italian ships, relying on visual spotting, could not even determine how many British ships were engaging them. British gunnery procedures, perfected during 2 years of war, achieved devastating accuracy at ranges where Italian ships could barely see their targets. The Royal Navy's investment in night fighting training, radar technology, and coordinated fire control systems paid enormous dividends in the darkness off Cape Matapan. The final act of the tragedy unfolded when British destroyers approached the disabled Pola to finish her with torpedoes. The Italian crew, having witnessed the destruction of their sister ships, offered no resistance. Captain Mario de Pisa ordered his men to abandon ship, then remained aboard to ensure proper surrender procedures. HMS Jervis finished Pola with a single torpedo at 0240 on March 29. As dawn broke over the Mediterranean, British ships conducted rescue operations for Italian survivors. Admiral Cunningham's orders were explicit: save as many enemy sailors as possible before withdrawing to avoid German air attack. The Royal Navy rescued 1,015 Italian survivors, transmitting their location to Italian authorities for additional rescue operations. The human cost of German intelligence failure was staggering. Of the 4,000 Italian sailors who sortied from Naples, 2,303 would never return home. 3 heavy cruisers, each representing millions of lire and years of construction, lay on the Mediterranean floor. 2 destroyers and their entire crews had vanished in the night action's fury. The strategic implications extended far beyond casualty figures. Italian naval operations would remain severely curtailed for the remainder of the war. The psychological impact on Italian crews was devastating. Subsequent sorties would be marked by extreme caution and reluctance to engage British forces. The Royal Navy had achieved complete dominance of the Eastern Mediterranean. Japanese naval observers in Rome filed detailed reports on the battle's lessons for Pacific operations. Captain NATO's analysis proved particularly prescient: night surface actions against radar-equipped opponents must be avoided. Italian technological inferiority, not tactical incompetence, determined battle outcome. Imperial Navy must prioritize radar development for surface units. The German reaction to the Cape Matapan disaster revealed the growing strain in Axis naval cooperation. General Hans Jeschneck, Luftwaffe Chief of Staff, blamed Italian demands for air support that exceeded German capabilities. Admiral Raeder privately criticized Italian naval performance while ignoring the Luftwaffe's intelligence failures that had precipitated the engagement. The recriminations extended to the highest levels of German command. Hitler's disappointment with Italian naval performance influenced subsequent decisions regarding Mediterranean strategy. The planned invasion of Malta was postponed indefinitely, partly due to questions about Italian naval support capabilities after Cape Matapan. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park celebrated their intelligence triumph with quiet satisfaction. Mavis Beatty, whose breakthrough had enabled Cunningham's victory, received personal congratulations from Admiral Cunningham during his post-war visit to Bletchley Park. Knox commemorated the victory with a poem celebrating Mavis and the grace of God in the triumph at Matapan. The technological lessons of Cape Matapan resonated throughout both Allied and Axis naval circles. Radar had proven decisive in night surface action, while air power demonstrated its ability to cripple capital ships in daylight. The integration of intelligence, technology, and tactics showcased modern naval warfare's increasing complexity. Italian naval architects, studying the battle's aftermath, began urgent programs to install radar equipment on surviving ships. But the technology gap proved impossible to close quickly. German radar systems, themselves inferior to British equipment, could not be produced in sufficient quantities for Italian requirements. The fuel shortage that had limited Italian naval operations became even more critical after Cape Matapan. With 3 major units lost and no prospect of increased fuel allocation, the Regia Marina was forced into an essentially defensive posture. Convoy escort and coastal defense became the primary missions for ships that had been designed for fleet actions. German naval intelligence underwent significant reorganization following the Cape Matapan debacle. New procedures for reconnaissance photography interpretation were implemented, while coordination between Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine intelligence services was formally improved. But the damage to German credibility with Italian partners had already been done. The British exploitation of their Cape Matapan victory was swift and comprehensive. Additional convoys to Greece proceeded without Italian naval interference. The evacuation of British forces from Greece and later Crete became possible partly because Italian ships remained in port. The Royal Navy's grip on Eastern Mediterranean communications was never again seriously challenged. The Japanese Imperial Navy's study of Cape Matapan influenced Pacific War preparations in unexpected ways. Recognizing the decisive importance of night fighting capabilities, Japanese naval training emphasized close-range torpedo attacks and superior optics rather than radar technology. This doctrinal choice would prove both advantageous and limiting in subsequent Pacific battles. The political ramifications within Italy were severe and long-lasting. Public confidence in naval leadership plummeted following news of the defeat. Mussolini's personal intervention in naval operations increased dramatically, further hampering tactical flexibility. The relationship between the Navy and other Italian military services deteriorated as blame for the disaster was distributed. Admiral Iachino's post-war analysis proved remarkably candid about Italian technological and tactical deficiencies. His admission that the battle revealed inferiority in effective aero-naval cooperation and the backwardness of our night battle technology became a template for honest military self-assessment that was rare in Axis circles. The industrial implications of Cape Matapan extended throughout the Italian war economy. Replacement ships could not be built due to steel shortages and shipyard capacity limitations. The loss of trained sailors represented an irreplaceable human resource that would affect Italian naval operations for the war's duration. British naval confidence, by contrast, reached new heights following the Cape Matapan victory. The Mediterranean fleet's morale, severely tested during the previous year's operations, rebounded dramatically. The successful integration of intelligence, air power, and surface forces provided a template for future operations that would be applied throughout the war. The German intelligence failure at Cape Matapan became a case study in the dangers of assumption-based planning. The Luftwaffe's casual approach to reconnaissance photography interpretation, combined with overconfidence in German analytical capabilities, had produced catastrophically incorrect assessments. The price of this failure was paid entirely in Italian blood. The lessons of Cape Matapan echoed through naval warfare for decades. The battle demonstrated the decisive importance of radar in night actions, the vulnerability of surface ships to air attack, and the critical value of communications intelligence. These technological and tactical innovations would reshape naval warfare throughout the remainder of World War II. The human stories emerging from Cape Matapan testified to individual courage amid technological and strategic failure. Italian sailors fought bravely with obsolete equipment against overwhelming odds. British crews demonstrated professional competence and humanitarian concern for defeated enemies. The battle's legacy honored both victors and vanquished while highlighting war's technological imperatives. The final irony of Cape Matapan lay in its strategic consequences. German intelligence had sought to unleash Italian naval power against British commerce. Instead, their flawed assessment had eliminated Italian naval capability and secured British dominance of the eastern Mediterranean. A single reconnaissance mistake had achieved what years of British naval pressure had failed to accomplish. The Mediterranean would remain contested throughout 1941 and 1942, but never again would Italian surface ships challenge British control of the sea lanes to Greece and Egypt. The 3 British battleships that German intelligence had dismissed as negligible threats had secured a strategic victory whose effects would last until Italy's surrender in September 1943. In the quiet offices of Bletchley Park, Mavis Beatty continued her work on Italian naval codes, knowing that her breakthrough had changed the course of the Mediterranean War. The 19-year-old codebreaker had achieved what entire fleets had failed to accomplish: the elimination of Italian naval power as a strategic threat to British operations. The Battle of Cape Matapan entered naval history as a perfect storm of intelligence failure, technological disparity, and tactical excellence. German overconfidence, Italian weakness, and British superiority had combined to produce one of the most one-sided naval victories since Trafalgar. The lesson was clear: in modern warfare, accurate intelligence and superior technology were more decisive than courage and determination alone.